Hey guys, Tom Henderson from RESGEN here, and I'm thrilled you are tuning into the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast, where we hear stories and have conversations about life in Christ, everyday discipleship, and exploring ways that we as men can give life to others. Like always, whether this is your first time listening or you haven't missed an episode yet, I appreciate you joining me for this edition of the podcast. My guest today is a friend I met over 10 years ago after he sent me a message on Facebook asking me if I would consider mentoring him. And we've been friends ever since. Jon Skudlarek is a husband, a father, and a regional supervisor for Tradehome Shoes, a shoe store that's been around for over 100 years. On today's show, Jon and I are going to bring a lot of the topics we discuss in our mentoring conversations onto the podcast. Topics like living out our faith in the workplace, how we can move away from a transactional mindset in our relationships, and how we can be men who give life to our employees, our coworkers, and customers. Trust me when I say this is going to be a fast-paced and fun episode. Here's my conversation with Jon Skudlarek. All right, we are joined right now by my good buddy, Jon Skudlarek. Jon, welcome to the Giving Life Podcast.
Thank you. Been looking forward to this.
Yeah, dude, man, this has been good. And so here's the crazy thing. In your little intro, I just shared how you and I first got connected over 10 years ago now, after when you were living in Fargo, North Dakota at the time. And I preached at the church you were attending, Prairie Heights Church, and you sent me a message over Facebook, like about 4:45 in the morning. It was time stamped at like 4:45 in the morning. You just shared a little bit about who you were, and then asked if I would ever be open to the idea of having some conversations and kind of on mentorship, leadership, and all that kind of thing. And I thought it was so awesome because we hadn't even met like personally yet. It was just something that I don't believe at that time, but you shot me this message, and here we are now, 10 years later, really mentoring each other and friends. It's been awesome.
Well, I don't know if you want to get into transactional right away or not, but I felt like I bribed you in that message about saying I'd pay like $100 an hour to talk with me. I mean. And I didn't know, maybe you were like mentor / shrink for me at the moment. Yeah. It's hard to say, right? But it is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. And no, we do want to talk about some of those moving beyond transactional relationships. So we will get there. But I do want to ask you first of all, I just kind of jumped right into it. So before we jump into it, we first need to get to know who Jon Skudlarek is, first of all. Okay, so just real quick, just tell guys who you are, a little bit about your family, what you do, and then we'll get right into it.
Okay. Well, again, I've been with the same company now I'm on my 25th year. So it's Tradehome Shoes. We've got a store in Sioux Falls. We've got them all over the country. But I've been with them in a bunch of different roles over the course of a quarter of a century. I've got 2 great daughters and a wife. I'll actually be married here 10 years in a couple of weeks. And so got to figure out what I'm going to do for that, obviously, relatively soon here. But no, it's been a fun ride. Obviously, it's been very fun. Having the relationship that we've had over the last 10 years, it's hard to believe it's been 10 years. But yeah, realistically, really kind of in a leadership role within the organization. And I enjoy it thoroughly. I mean, having the opportunity to pour into people day in and day out and help them improve by 1%. I enjoy it a ton. It's far and away the reason I do what I do.
Right. And Jon, as you mentioned, so you've been with the company now 25 years. But the company itself has been around 100. I mean, so just think about that.
Right.
Like the longevity of the company is over 100 years now. Back in 1921 is when it started. And you've worked at that company for a quarter of their existence. So would you say that you are responsible for their success?
I think it would be really terrible of me to try and take any credit for that. I maybe have had a very small, piece of it, but it's just we have a great collection of people that run the organization, and I get the opportunity to work alongside some pretty incredible people. So trust me, it takes an army to have success when you talk about 25 states. So
yeah, and 25 states. You've been there 25 years, Jon. What's kept you? Because that's a long time to work for one company. I mean, we live in a pretty transitional mindset now. People go into different companies, different careers, all of that. And you started 25 years ago, kind of just as working in the store, correct?
Yep. Started
part-time. You've worked your way up. And so, like,
yep.
I mean, it's a great story. So what's kept you in the game at Tradehome for 25 years now?
Well, so I think a lot of companies try and box you in. I think there's a lot of companies that want you to do it a certain way. Tradehome, honestly, to its credit, really allows you to put a lot of yourself into the position. The other part of it too is just your opportunity for advancement. I mean, even our president started part-time. And so when you have the ability to move up within an organization like that, where the sky really is the limit, it's something you tend to stick with for a period of time, and you enjoy the process of it. So, I haven't been in the same position for all 25 years, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
We've moved around a little bit as a family and stuff, but your ability to move up. But again, I'll go back to it throughout the podcast. The opportunity to help others do the same thing is easily the number one reason I stick around.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I know that is your heart. We're going to get into that because, as you know, this is the Giving Life podcast. And what's fun is just even conversations that we've had over the last 10 years, and just the statement of men who give life has been something that you and I have visited over and over again in so many of our conversations. And that, so much so that it helped name this platform that is the podcast that now so many dudes are listening to, and that's really fun. Well, I want to go back to just the way that we first connected, and that is on the message that you sent on mentorship. And you are correct in that you said, "Hey, look, I'd love to just give the ministry, like $100 every time you talk to me and all of that." And if you remember correctly, I said, "No, I don't want that to be the foundation or how this relationship works, because then it's too transactional. And if you want to give to the ministry, great. I mean, because yes, we are donor supported, and that's how RESGEN does everything. So if you want to give to the ministry, awesome. But I don't want to tie it to my quote unquote services. I'd rather just build the relationship and see where the Lord takes it." But where did you, why did you first even send that message, Jon? What was something that, why did you seek mentorship in the first place?
Well, I think at that point I'd seen you speak a couple different times.
Yep.
And I liked the way in which you gave the message. You did a good job, holding everybody's attention as you went through the process of giving it. But I think sometimes for me, my goal in life has often been to put myself in the right room, right? The room where I feel like I can learn from the other individuals inside of it. In this case, obviously one other individual. So when I feel compelled to, I guess the thing I would say is if something is put on my heart, I tend to act. I think a lot of times that happens to people and they don't. They just sit back and they say, well, maybe now is not the right time. So I think in your situation, after seeing you speak at Prairie Heights a couple of times, I'm like, man, this guy's the real deal. And so, I forced my way into the room, bribing, or however you want to define it, right? So I was going to get in that room some way, somehow, right?
But so, I love that. So I want to go back and to that statement of putting yourself in the right room. Unpack that just a little bit more from me, as far as you think about just the ways that can impact you. Is it in a room where you feel that you can have impact on others? What did you mean by that?
Well, I think so. Number one, for people that are going through life and they're trying to, everybody wants to be a success, right? And success looks different for a lot of different people. But I do think that who you surround yourself with, I know you talk a lot about your band of brothers. Mm-hmm. It's something you bring up a ton. You talk oftentimes about how much they've helped you at certain points in your life. And ultimately, I would say that if you don't have the right people in your corner at the right moments in life can go completely different. So to me, that's always been a big part of my life. Put yourself in the right room, do it consistently over the course of time. Have people in your life that'll have real conversations with you, because it's easy sometimes when you climb the corporate per se to have a bunch of yes men in your corner. But I don't think that's what you necessarily want. And I also would say that even being in a room where maybe you're doing that for other people, that's critical as well. We talk oftentimes about mentorship a lot in our conversations. And, you talk about speaking life, and it's a big part of, what fills my cup up and gets me going. But yeah, getting in the right room is a big deal.
Yeah. That whole idea of that we become the average of the top 5 people that we hang out with. And there can be different circles, there can be different fives here and there, but for the most part, it's who are you surrounding yourself with, and how are they influencing you? So are we surrounding ourselves with other guys that are seeking to love God with all they are? Are we surrounding ourselves with other guys that are seeking to continue to grow in their relationship with their wives and their kids and in their community as leadership? And then in a corporate setting, how are we helping raise the level of those that God has given that platform? And I know that that's something that you've really strived to do and that you've done well with Tradehome. But the whole concept of even the Giving Life podcast, men whose life in Christ gives life to others. Being a man who gives life, that came out of a conversation that you and I had, and I'll never forget it. I was actually speaking at a conference in California, and you shot me a text, and you used to do this all the time and say, hey, you got 5 minutes. I know we didn't have this on the schedule. I'll make sure I send another donation or something. And I said, yep, give me 30 minutes and we'll chat. But because I just remember I was staying at a host home at the time, at this conference at a pastor friend of mine at his house, and so I just went into the bedroom where I was sharing there, or when I was talking to you, and we talked about just this whole idea of how do we give life? How do we give life to our wives? How do we give life to our kids? How do we give life in the workplace? And you said, Tom, that's it. That's your message for the next Men's Summit. I mean, this was in the infancy even. I mean, the Men's Summit was starting to kind of become a thing and take off. The Lord's hand was definitely on it. But you said that was what I needed to talk to. And then you actually wrote that down on your whiteboard at that time, and it was up there for a year. You left it up there just for a year so that you looked at it every single day. Why was that something that just became such an important thing for you personally?
So I know you and I are all about productivity, right? But we also try to incorporate margin in our lives. And I was just having a conversation with a buddy of mine because, I wanted to kind of ready myself a little bit for the podcast. And everything in life becomes so scheduled, right? You everything, okay, you have this at this hour, this at this hour. And all of a sudden the unscheduled time goes away. And I think when you talk about speaking life into people, being there for people, allowing yourself to have these unscheduled conversations at times that are needed, it's such a big deal. You have to allow yourself the time for that. You can't schedule out your entire day. Because if you do that, you will miss things. You will miss opportunities. You will miss. We had honestly today, we had a Zoom call with an individual that's going through a tough time, me and another buddy. And it was interesting because in the midst of that conversation, he said, man, my friends are just not very good. And I just needed a couple of dudes that I could talk to about this. And it's a tough situation in his life. His dad's going through some stuff. And it's one of those things where if you don't have time for that, if you don't make time for that, or if you don't have the margin set aside in your day for that, you're going to miss it. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to have a lot of those conversations where you can be there for individuals, as you so commonly say, speak life into them. And it's such a big deal because unfortunately the world isn't turning slower, it's turning quicker, right? Yeah. And I swear every day that passes, we get pulled in more directions. And so it's even more critical to have time in your day for those unscheduled conversations.
Right. So now for a guy like you, Jon, and you spend a lot of time on the road. Now, obviously over the last, couple of years that changed significantly, but it's ramping up and you've started traveling a lot more again now. And I mean, you're on the road a lot of times, sometimes, you're Monday through Friday, you come home Friday evening, and then you're kind of trying to, fully engage at home and with the girls. But when you're on the road, I mean, there's a schedule that you're getting to different stores, you're going to different meetings with different managers and all that kind of thing. How are you able to build margin in when you have such a busy schedule during the week? Because I think it's easy for us to say, well, we just need to build margin into our calendars. We just need to create some breathing room. It's easy to say it, but
Sure.
What does that really look like? How have you been able to do that and achieve success in that?
Well, but again, let's go back to the conversation you and I had that maybe spurred this conversation, or the message you gave. It's no different than that, right? Maybe in that moment you don't have time, but you can say, hey, give me 30 minutes. Hey, I'm in the middle of something, let me get back with you in an hour, and set yourself a reminder. But again, I think so often when those moments happen, if you make time for it, it can be pretty revelatory, right? I mean, I think those moments can be huge breakthroughs. But I think that's an excuse, right? When people say, well, I'm just too busy. I'm just too busy for this or that. You can always make time, regardless of how busy you are. If something major happened at home and a person had to be home all of a sudden, they would make time for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes these moments are really big moments too. Maybe not as big as the home moment, but they're still big moments. And you got to find time to have those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that comes from, and I know it does with you, is that there's this general care for people. And sometimes we have to pray for that. Sometimes we have to say, God, I need you to help me see people today. I need you to help me care for people. I'm entering a really busy time, or whatever the case may be. And to say, God, help me not lose the importance of people in that amount of time, especially when you're going and your job is to make managers, employees, stores more productive, more profitable. I mean, that's the overall business mindset, the focus. I mean, Tradehome's been around for 100 years because you have found ways to continue to be productive and perform and profitable. But at the same time, also recognizing that there's people behind the productivity and behind the profits. So how have you been able to, especially in the business setting, where sometimes you just got to call people to task, but also try to recognize that I need to care for them as people too?
Again, I think people can be challenged. And I think there's a lot of people out there that want to grow and want to become better. And I think you can challenge them in the right ways. I also, one thing we every time we review the year, right? We always do that in the month of February. We sit around in a boardroom, and we're always asked the question, what was your high point? When you look back on 21, what are some things that stick out? And I had to sit in it for a second this year and got passed over, which is uncommon. Usually I'm ready to speak whenever somebody wants to listen. But for me, it has become more of this, hey, let's develop the person. Let's not focus so much on the trade home piece. Let's focus on the person in front of you. And I think if you just focus on helping develop that individual, because I think, Tom, for a lot of us, somebody's poured into us at one point. Somebody's done it for us, right? I think you have to have that pay it forward mentality. So as much as it is important for us to be in the right room for ourselves, it's equally as important for us to be in the right room for somebody else. And so, again, I think if you focus on developing people, I think a lot of it just falls into place.
Yeah. That reminds me of something that you text me. Occasionally you'll text me random thoughts in the middle of the day as they pop into your head, or I don't know how they come about, but all of a sudden I'll have this text message show up from you with some sort of quote or whatever. But you text this, I don't know, maybe 6-8 weeks ago, and I wrote it down because I thought it was a really good thought. And the statement was this, that, and it speaks to what you just said, Jon: developing the human being and focusing on them, and not while you're associated with them. is where leadership goes to the next level. Because what that is really speaking to is, I'm not going to really worry about why I'm associated or why I'm investing in them or why I'm trying to develop them. It's just that I want to develop them because I want them to be the best that they can be. I want them to understand like the level that they can go to in their life, whether that be in business wise or in their marriage or in their relationship with God or whatever. But how can I develop them? And then at the same time, that's really developing you as in your leadership, because leadership is people.
For sure. Well, and so much of it, right? You could have a mirror up. We talk about it all the time. You're talking to these individuals, you're having conversations, and so many times I could have a mirror up, right? Because in some ways I'm speaking to them, yes, but I'm also speaking to myself. And so, yeah, I mean, again, it's to me, it's one of those things where when you think back on, I'm 40 years old. I think you're near me in age. I won't go to how old you are, but
thank you for bringing me down.
You think about all the mistakes. Yeah, there we go. Right. There we go. You think about all the mistakes you make, right? And even think about like the last 10 years, even when you think about, having a 10-year wedding anniversary, think about all the ways you did not treat your wife the right way in certain moments. And I think if you can help other people navigate the choppy waters of life a little easier, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. That consistent looking of just, okay, how am I pouring into others? And I think that on a previous podcast and talking with Clay Scroggins, of course you heard because, you came to the summit and by the way, gentlemen, Jon has only missed, I want to say you've only missed maybe one summit. And it was because you were in the process of moving from Indianapolis, to Denver at the time. But, you just blocked that weekend out. You get other dudes from not just the region that you're living in, but in other regions as well. And I think you had like 7 dudes fly in this year for it. So thanks for always just being such an encouragement to me. But Clay, you heard speak at this year's summit and on the podcast that I think was just previously to the one that you and I are doing right now, he talked about that there's things that we go through in life. There's experiences we have, there's mistakes that we may make and that we will make. And we may not like, some of those, the outcomes of those, or some of the pain that goes along with some of the things that we've gone through, but asking God, how can he use this? How can he bring purpose to that to help other people with where they're at? So we're learning through the process in our own life, but then we're able to help others through that process as well. And that's a game changer. That's like when we can have that mindset, that changes the game as to how we even look at our experiences and how we can pour into other people in their experiences.
For sure. Well, again, you're going through it for a reason. It's hard to see it sometimes. It's really hard to see it sometimes. And unfortunately, at times it can be really painful. Mm-hmm. But I think there's always clarity on the other side.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the midst, but on the other side for sure.
So, Jon, I know that you're a dude that really strives to not compartmentalize your faith and live out your faith in all aspects of your life. So I want to chat with you a little bit about some simple ways that you've tried to live out your faith in the workplace. I know that this has been an area that you've consistently we've talked a lot about, that you've strived to, and I think that you've grown a ton in just seeing you grow in the last 10 years of just where your faith is not that it was ever, but that it's not just a weekend thing, which I think it's easy for us sometimes to say, well, no, I have my faith hat on Sundays, or at this men's event or at this Bible study or whatever, but then now I've got my work hat on. But you've really strived to live out and be consistent in your faith, and not just make it a Sunday thing. So what are some of the things that you've seen God be doing in your life that you've tried to do so that your faith really is a 7-day-a-week thing for you?
Well, and it's a tough question to answer sometimes, because quite frankly, it's such a journey. And obviously, in a lot of ways, I think we naturally tend to focus on all the areas we're not doing a very good job and we're still struggling. Again, I would say that a lot of the leadership pieces within Tradehome absolutely come from, whether it be the leadership summit in Sioux Falls. And part of the reason why I blocked that out is because I think it's such a big deal. I think it's such a big deal for men to come together and challenge each other. And obviously that happens every year there. But the other thing that I would say too is just the fact that as much as we're connected in the world today, we're not. And I think just being a person that takes the time to talk to people and listen to people in their deepest, darkest hours. I've got a couple of, and I would call them friends, quite frankly, but whether it be managers within my region or outside of it that are, their dads are near the end of their lives and they're struggling through that. And so, again, the faith piece is a big, big deal, because if you try and go through life and figure it out all on your own, you're going to struggle a lot more. And even when you talk about, again, your band of brothers, I have some go-to dudes, right, that I lean on, and it is critical. But, again, I'm a work in progress, and it's difficult for me to sit here and do a stump speech on all the ways I'm, living out my faith in the workplace. Again, I think I've gotten better. I agree with you, but I've got a long way to go. So,
well, one thing I know that you do to keep your mind focused on you being Christ to others in whatever environment you're going into, because a lot of times when we do our phone calls and our conversations, you're driving from in between stores, or hey, I'm going to be in the car for about 6 hours a day driving, wherever.
Sure.
And you're listening to podcasts and sermons and Christian music that helps you keep your focus on the things above and not the things of this world, because it's very simple to be enamored by the things of this world. It's to,
sure.
And I know that you're going through, you're in the process right now of, you sold your house. You're in the process of going to be finding that new house. And we've talked, how do we provide for the family what we need, but then also understand that this is not our home, and that our life is not to be about what we have here in our possessions, but at the same time, we want to be a blessing to other people, and we want to be used by God. And so I know that those are things that you're constantly thinking about, and you're constantly wrestling with those things and having conversations with them, which I think it just naturally influences you. The more you talk about it, the more you are hearing scripture and messages and all that, the more it just naturally flows out of you. So while you may not think that, I don't know how much I really do, those things in and of themselves, and I would just say to the guys that are listening right now, those things, as we're continuing to put the word of God in different forms into our brains and our hearts, it just begins to more naturally flow out of us.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one thing I've done for years is every time I work out in the mornings, I'm listening to Christian music every single day. And partially because I think how you start your day is absolutely critical. Whether we talk about productivity or whatever, right? But yeah, it's been a huge part of it. It really has been. And as much as we don't want to admit it, what you put in comes out. So I mean, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple.
Right. Yeah. And establishing that at the front end of the day and saying,
right.
This is the day that the Lord has made. I'm going to rejoice and be glad in it. This is what the kind of thoughts I want to have. I want to marinate in before I go into whatever the rest of the day holds for me. Can I set that foundation? This is what Tuesday's about. This is what Thursday's about.
Well, and I think life is so full of, you think about how many curveballs come up, right? There's been plenty in your life. There's been plenty in mine. And I think just establishing that early in your day and getting ready for those unforeseen curveballs is critical, because they're coming. I mean, at some point, a curveball is going to come up and in on you. And are you going to be ready for it mentally, physically? And if you are, it just seems to go a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to go back to what we started the podcast with when I first talked about the whole mentorship thing, and you brought in the transactional mindset, because we've had a lot of great conversations about this, and I've been always adamant about saying that our relationships can't be transactional, which is a little bit difficult to talk about, especially in the world in which you live, because in the sales world, it's all about transactions.
Sure.
I mean, it's all
Absolutely.
about transactions, because without the transactions, you don't have a job. I mean,
Right.
like flat
Yeah.
out, So, but it's very simple for that transactional mindset to work its way into our relationships, even in how we view Christ, even in how we view our faith. That it's okay. Well, I need to do this in order to get God's love or to get His approval. Some of us have grown up in homes that it has been transactional. No, I need to do this to prove my worth or value or whatever. One of the things that you and I have talked a lot about is just that mindset can easily slip into the way we view marriage and our spouses. And I remember a conversation that you and I had early on where you said that there are times where that can be a challenge for you. And I hope you don't mind me saying this. I don't think you would, but because I did tell you that I was going to kind of go there a little bit, but about even to the aspect of, well, if she gets to spend this much on something, then I get to spend this much on something. And how that mindset can really create issues in a marriage if it's not taken care of. So let's just kind of process and dialogue and talk about that, because that's one area of tremendous growth I've seen in you as well, and that you've really kind of gotten out of that transactional mindset, which I'm so proud of you about.
Well, I think, you say that, and then, I bought my wife something the last trip I was out, but I think part of it too, right? Like when I was growing up, like my mom's love language was gifts, right? So she'd go on these business trips, and then she'd come back, and yeah, you wanted to give her a hug, but you really wanted to know what's in the suitcase, right? What's in the suitcase for me? And so, I always struggle when you say you've grown so much, because again, I think I've gotten a little bit better. I think I have, and I think I've made it a lot less about me, but yet I still just love to give gifts, as you well know, right? And so, and again, maybe that isn't transactional. Maybe a guy can just sit there and use the crutch of, hey, it's my love language. This is why I do this. But, I think, number one, it can get you in trouble because when you look at life that way, it cheapens everything. I mean, we even talk about our relationship, and obviously we've moved well beyond that. I still donate, but it's a lump sum at the end, right? But it's just, you can just get yourself in a lot of trouble when you live life that way, and it just cheapens the process, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, and because while it can work in the positive, and I would say this, that Jon, you have a spirit and a gift of generosity. I mean, that's just who you are. And you enjoy that, and that is a gift. And it's not done with strings attached. It's not done with a give to get mentality. And that's where the transactional mindset can be destructive. If it's I'll give to get, or because I did not get this from you, I'm now going to withhold. And of course, in a marriage context, if that is the mindset, that's going to be some really difficult conversations. That's going to be some, in my message on the this year at the summit, I talked about that we as men set the emotional thermostat in our home. And are we setting it to cold or unapproachable or, just frigid, and so when it becomes transactional, where I only give love if I get love, I only give this if I get something in return, then that's not true relationship. And that it is a desire to love and to serve. Because when you think about Christ, yes, because He gave His life, we receive salvation. Praise God for that. But He gave without now I was saying, even if they don't receive this gift, I'm going to give. Even if they don't deserve my love, my forgiveness, my grace, my mercy, I'm still going to give everything, even though I know they're going to struggle giving me their lives the way that I've given my life for them. I mean, I don't know about you, but that example right there is one that that I mean, you and I can never live up to. But
Right.
it's our desire, right? I mean, it's our desire to love God and love others in the way that He loves us, regardless of what does that mean transactionally or what it means for us.
Absolutely. Well, and again, it's, I mean, yeah. It's funny because when you think about kids and you're playing around with them, I mean, they look at it probably a lot better than we do sometimes, right? They're just, most of the time when kids give hugs or they come and give you a kiss or whatever the case may be, they just want to be in your presence, and they don't care about anything else. And yeah, you can learn a lot in those moments too. But yeah, I definitely agree. It's a tough standard to live up to sometimes.
Yeah, well, and only by God's grace and power can we, for sure. Okay, there's one other thing that I want to make sure that we touch on here before we're gonna have to jump off in a bit, and it's something that you and I have talked about a couple of times, but this is really something that you have been thinking about, you wrote down, that you talked with me about, and it was this concept, this idea called the final 10. And so I want you to just kind of unpack this whole concept of the final 10 and what does that mean? What does it mean for you? And then what does that mean for us as dudes?
So I think a lot of times it's easy in conversation and stuff to scratch the surface. It's easy, to have a good conversation with somebody and maybe never get to their final 10 and have those conversations that really matter. I would reach back to our conversation earlier about being unscheduled, about being there for people in their times of need, because I think that's where a lot of this lives. This idea that, you get into the final 10 with people. I mean, that's where, in my mind, that's where relationship magic happens, where you actually really get to know somebody for who they are and what they're about. And so again, for me, it's number one. We talk all the time, Tom, about, I offered you, I think, my old Apple Watch, and you're like, no, I'm not into that. I'm already too connected. So number one, you have to, in those moments, you have to disconnect from everything, right? The phone's got to be down. The watch has got to be on silent, and you got to be fully locked in where your feet are, right? Or where your butt is, right? You just got to be fully locked in to that conversation. Because I think, again, so much of what we do day in and day out just scratches the surface. We don't get into the nitty gritty, right? We all have our own challenges. We all have our own things going on in life. But we have to realize that, especially when you're in a leadership position, sometimes you have to set that aside, and you have to really be able to dig in where you're at and have those conversations with individuals to get into that final 10. And it's just something that I've really tried to focus on the last few years. And again, my goal in that process is not to make them better trade home managers, if we're talking about business, but it's about just really trying to find out who they are as people and where I can come alongside them in that.
Mm-hmm. So before we get to the final 10, then there's the first 90. Right? Is that
That's right? No, absolutely, absolutely.
So the first 90 would be describe the first 90 and what you mean by that. And then I want to give us some context for different types of relationship scenarios of the 90 and 10.
Okay. Well, to me, the 90 is it's general conversation. It's those moments in life where you're just having conversation about, skin deep stuff, nothing real in depth. And I mean, again, maybe it's catching up and seeing how their kids are and how their marriage is going and how life is going and stuff along that line. Maybe you start talking a little bit about things that are challenging them and stuff along that line. But to me, The 90 a lot of times it's those quick sit downs where you're maybe hanging out for, 20, 30 minutes having a conversation. And really the final 10 is something that you have to, it doesn't, to me, it's one of those things when you think about life and you have those individuals that share it all right away, you're like, wow, that was deep, really fast. It was deep. This is more about the relationships that you've really worked on and worked within over the course of time. And again, the final 10 to me are those individuals in your life that, they may be your band of brothers, they may be business colleagues, but it's people that you have a pretty strong relationship already with. And it is not generally something that happens in your first couple sit downs, right? It's stuff you got to work on to get to. Even when you think about our relationship, it's not like we started having these unbelievably in-depth conversations in our first 30 minutes. It took at least 45.
Right. No, that's good. And I wanted to make sure that we understood that, like, the delineation of that there's a depth of relationship there. And, the hard part is that you can't have that with everybody, because there is, right. We need to care for everybody, and we need to do what we can for those that we come in contact with and all of that. But sometimes we can stress ourselves out. To go back to our other conversation, building margin, sometimes we can put so much pressure on ourselves that we have to have all the answers for everyone, or that we need to, provide something for every single person that that can be pulling for our attention, which there may be a time for that. There may be some things that we can do there, but there are other times where God has somebody else in mind that can provide something for them. And we all have to be cautious as well to make sure that we're not robbing our wife and kids, or, other situations that we are in all the time, because of course that could be problematic as well. So that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about just kind of the depth of relationship there and what you meant with that, because sometimes I think that we can pressurize, and we do this to ourselves often, of like, well, I have to provide an answer, or I have to do something to meet every situation. But the reality is we're just not going to be able to.
Right. Sometimes you're not the right guy. I mean, even this conversation I had today, I thought of somebody else going through similar situations in life, and, I connected the two. Right. And so sometimes, yeah, you're right. I think there's no point in putting extra pressure on yourself, thinking that you've got to always be the solution guy, right? Which I think naturally as men, it's easy for us to,
we'll fix it.
Well, yeah, even think about in marriage, right? So many times, like, if my wife's talking to me, I'm hearing like every third word, because all I'm doing while I'm listening is I'm planning the solution for her. Well, the reality is sometimes she doesn't want to hear it.
Right.
Sometimes she just wants you to listen.
Right.
Sometimes she doesn't want to have any solution.
I would say most of the time. Most of the time, she just wants you to listen.
That's probably true.
Yeah. One of the questions.
So you gotta switch it off.
Yeah.
No, sometimes you got to switch it off. It's hard to do that sometimes.
Totally. One of my favorite questions to ask Laura and the boys now is, and I learned to ask this, I know that we've talked about it before, probably 18 months, 2 years ago, was what are you looking for from me for this, in this specific situation? I mean, do you just want me to listen? Do you want me to fix the problem? Do you want me just to, like, put my cape on and just rescue you? Or what? I mean, what are you looking for from me? How can I best support, encourage, and serve you in this? And I'm going to tell you, Jon, that question has revolutionized my marriage, because all of a sudden now I know what the expectation or the desire is out of it. And there are still times that I want to fix it, or that I want to give my feedback, or say, here's what I would have done in that situation. But if it's just a listening hat that I need to wear, I need to zip the lips and just keep the hat on.
Which is Yeah, which is amazing that you have the ability to do that. And obviously, I don't know that I'm where you are in that yet. I mean, I'm definitely a work in progress, but
well, we all are for sure. Trust me,
yeah.
Laura's like, I'd like you to wear that hat a little bit more. so trust me on that. But you said something that, that I want to go back to, because even though it wasn't like you had to do everything for that conversation that you were in, but you could do something. And the something that you could do was connect them or build a bridge with someone else or an organization or something that could help them or whatever. So you were able to think about, as the Lord brought different things to your mind of, I might not be the right person, or I don't have time for this right now, or I can't make time for it right now or whatever. But I do think I can connect you, or I do think I can do something here that could be helpful.
Yeah. And again, life is about journeying together, right? And if two people are on similar paths, well, let them journey together, because there's clearly strength in that. And so to me, it was pretty simple. And I even said in the conversation, hey, I'd like to, have another conversation later in the week, and we can unpack this more as, you learn more about what's going on. But yeah, I think a lot of times it's easy for us to do that, where we may know two people that can journey together on something, and we should connect them.
Yeah, and I want to end with, and normally I like to kind of just give opportunity for what we call the final word. I mean, you're a listener, you know that we kind of do this, but I want to just kind of prime the pump a little bit on your final word. It's from something you said earlier in the podcast, where you talked about just striving to be 1% better every day. And so I'd love for your final word to be an unpacking of what does that look like for you, and just as an encouragement for each one of us to be 1% better each day.
Well, number one, I mean, for me, it's about schedule. You got to get up the same time every day. You got to try and go to bed at the same time. And you got to get your mind right initially. I talked earlier about, listening to Christian music while I'm working out, just to get your mind in the right space. The other thing that I would say too is surround yourself with the right people, get into the right rooms, help others get into the right rooms, fill yourself with the right stuff. And then the other part of it is, as important as it is to be able to put the jersey on and go into the game, you got to be able to take it off, and you got to be able to hang it up, and you got to be able to forget about the game a few days a week. And we talk all the time about leftovers, and when you're a productivity guy, and it's all about climbing the proverbial ladder, man, you got to be able to just hang that jersey up and focus on your kids, your family, your wife, and make sure that you're pouring into them as hard and as often as you are in the workplace, because it's critical. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes of all time is, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And I think as men, we have to be reminded of that often, because, man, it is so easy to get caught up in the rat race of life.
Yeah, that's so good, John. That is so good. It's a great final word for us, for sure. Well, if guys want to connect with you, unpack a little bit more of our conversation, how best can they do that, John?
Probably, honestly, my email, Jon@Tradehome. I'm not big into Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. And so otherwise, obviously they can call my cell, but maybe we'll start with email, yeah. And then we'll transition to that. So
yeah, well, that's so good, brother. I appreciate the time. As always, we have great conversations, and I love it when how it began as a relationship of me mentoring you. It really has become mutual mentorship and a great friendship and relationship. So I'm proud of you. I love you. I'm super glad and thankful for our friendship and the conversation we had here today. So thanks for being a guest on the Giving Life Podcast.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate the time.
Thanks again for tuning into this episode of the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jon Skudlarek. If you'd like to connect with Jon further, feel free to email him at john@tradehome.com. And of course, if you found our conversation helpful, I encourage you to share it with others in your relational world that may find it helpful as well. Lastly, before you sign off, if you could take 30 seconds to rate and review the podcast, I would greatly appreciate it. It truly is an easy way to help us both expand our reach and impact more people for the Lord. All right, that's all for today. Thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next time on the RESGEN Giving Life Podcast. Until then, continue striving to be men whose life in Christ gives life to others.